Today on Gritty, we talk about an insidious, silent killer, a life-sucking force that people naively and foolishly welcome into their lives, a life-wrecking force that the fast-changing modern age has thrust upon the modern human mind. This insidious killer is stress. Today, I'm joined by the deep-thinking, intense, and amazing Dr. Hilary Lampers. She explains stress in clinical and colloquial terms. She talks about how our bodies and brains are all that we really have, and how we should treat them. Human beings have evolved to thrive under stress. We need stress, but today's modern stress is different. It's a different animal from the kind of stress human beings have evolved to handle. On today's episode, find out these differences and how to live better. You can learn more from Dr. Hilary's website, huntharvesthealth.com. This episode is part 1 of 2. And it doesn't matter to me if I'm really successful in a business or, the other areas of my life if I'm not able to have sex. Like they sort of like really cancel each other out. I'll just be honest. Like it's to me, that's almost one of those canary in the coal mine things. Like, hey, something isn't right. I shouldn't be crushing at work and conquering in business, but then when I come home, have no sex drive.
So they come to us like, I don't have enough testosterone. So they think immediately it's their testosterone because society has kind of trained men to think that way, that testosterone is everything. Right. And really testosterone is just a hormone that's synergistically like in this orchestra with insulin, adrenaline, cortisol, all these stress hormones, growth hormone, all these things. And it's not just testosterone.
Here's the deal. Like you can't know it all, but Dr. Hilary Lampers knows quite a bit. So today on the Gritty Bowman podcast, she and I are going to sit down and talk about stress. And the reason I want to talk about this, it's been on my mind a lot lately. Last year when we did our podcast at the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Rendezvous, it was one of our highest downloaded podcasts, probably because it had the word testosterone and sex in the title. But actually I got massive quantity of emails from people asking more follow-up questions to this on this subject. So I know it resonated deeply with people. And one of the main things that we talked about was stress and the impact that stress has on your life. And one of the things that you kind of said to me was, Brian, like you're not Superman. Perhaps you should get your stress under control, and then, things will fall into place. So I've worked on that this year a lot. I really have. And, so what I wanted to do was talk about stress, how it's a killer, what's good, what's bad about it, get some foundation in place for that. The other day my wife came home. This is just a couple days ago. She came home and she told me about a friend of hers that has going through like a life crisis, right? Like there was some things that have happened, in her life that have really brought her world down around her. Okay. Mm-hmm. Some tragedy and some betrayal and things like that. So, and she was telling me about the story about this woman. I couldn't help but see like the way that their life was playing out was just a gigantic huge stressful life. Like the
like
choices,
most of us.
And the way they had the way they were going through life, it wasn't a surprise that a lot of these things happened because of just the stress that's part of their everyday life. And I think it sneaks up on people. Like they don't know that it's a problem or that it's out there because it's become second nature and it's just part of, being a go-getter or being a mom,
Right.
So with that introduction, that long-winded explanation, talk to me about stress. What is it?
What is stress? Well, I think it's something that everybody is pretty familiar with in their life on some level or another. It's actually a natural mechanism built within our nervous system to Well, I mean, there's different levels of stress. So for you to be able to go get up in the morning and get out of bed, for you to go to sleep at night, you have to have some sort of stress, meaning your body is constantly trying to balance healthy stress versus negative stress. And it does that mainly through the nervous system and what we call the part of the brain called the limbic system. And this is the deep internal part of the brain that holds the autonomic nervous system. So that's kind of a big word, but the autonomic nervous system also has two parts. And you've probably heard of this, like the layman's terms is the fight or flight or the rest and digest parts of your body. And this is kind of really where stress itself is balancing us. So you have to be able to fight or flight. Like that's kind of what gets you up in the morning and gets you out of bed is this, we call it the sympathetic response. It wakes you up. It brings blood flow to your extremities. It increases your heart rate. It says, hey, have some energy. Get up. Yeah. And the main chemical that we see with sympathetic stress is adrenaline, or what we call in medical terms epinephrine. And so I like
adrenaline.
Adrenaline. So we'll talk a little bit maybe later here about the genetics of adrenaline and why some people may be more addicted to adrenaline than others. But and then there is the parasympathetic side, which is the side at night where you start coming down and you want to eat dinner and you want to chill out, you want to digest your food, you want to rest, and then you get tired and you want to go to sleep. The parasympathetic, I guess that would kind of be part of what the parasympathetic is doing. And so those two are constantly balancing themselves
so the
through all parts of your day.
It's the sympathetic nervous system?
Yeah, so you have, so think of your brain. Mm-hmm. You've got different parts of your brain, but the cerebral cortex is what makes us humans. It makes us, it gives us our ethical, moral, problem solving, should I do this, should I not, side of our brain. This is what animals, like the lion and the bear and the deer, they don't have this. They live what we call the reptilian brain. They're just, it's part of the brain that's like, I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need to have sex, I need to create. Like that's what it does, right? Yeah. So we have that emotional cerebral cortex. Then in the middle of under the cerebral cortex, we kind of have the midbrain, and this is the limbic system, and this is what holds our emotional center. So it's what holds our memories. It's the amygdala and the hippocampus. They hold memory. So that's where if you smell something like your girlfriend in high school's perfume, you like flash back to her face, you know? Yeah. That's the same part of the brain that this autonomic nervous system lives in. Okay. So stress is very much tied into, so in that autonomic nervous system, you have your sympathetic and your parasympathetic, and they're that balancing system.
Right.
And this is why stress can be very tied into emotions and can be very tied into memory and can be very tied into events that happened in our life that, and I think this is what again differentiates us from the animals, is this, that we can do what's called rumination. So we think about things. We have memories about things. You know, if your heart was broken, it's like you never get over it. It like traumatizes you for the rest of your life. These are the things we think about, and they may actually influence our future lives and how we interact with other people, how we perceive our world. And so that area of the brain, stress is kind of, that's the center of it. And so if you want to think about stress, you have to think about your brain. Your brain controls your stress. There is different areas like genetics. Some people have genes that are more propensatory towards stress. Some people have those same genes, but they're not propensatory towards as much stress, or their perception. It's like your perception changes. And that has to do with the neurochemicals that are secreted by stress from these areas. So the brain is this it's the key player in how somebody either responds to the stress sympathetically, like they go into fight or flight, or they respond more parasympathetically, where they're kind of like, whatever. And you've met people like that, right? I guess you and I are a little bit more similar in our stress. I'm a ruminator. It's the same thing. Like I think about things. I try to overanalyze things. If I made a mistake, I will stay up for days I will be ruminating on that mistake. Ryan, my other half, who most of you know, stealthy hunter, he is literally like, all right, he gets stressed. Okay. And he just like goes to bed, falls asleep, wakes up the next day like nothing happened. And I'm like, how do you do that? I think part of it is genetics for sure. Part of it is environment. And I think how we were raised and the environment in which we lived in when we were developing neural patterns as children. So if you grew up in a very stressful environment, it's more likely that you will be easily stressed just in your future.
I would have thought maybe the opposite would be true.
Well, and that is where the other part comes in is that we are all born with inherent personalities. And I think that we all are born with different brains. And I think that's where genetic plays in a role, and the genetics they appropriately will decide how we respond to that stress.
Yeah.
But I think it also has to do with exposures. So if you grew up in an environmental household I think there's also something to be said, though, for, the exposures that you have at that age. So if you grow up in a household where maybe it's a stressful environment, like you live in a poor neighborhood and you're worried about your safety all the time and things like that, you can maybe even grow resilient with that. Like you learn kind of this stress mechanism that maybe in a way might be protecting you. And I think again, that may lend itself to what's your personality, do you take on challenges even at a young age and you just you do it? But I think sometimes we see, especially in abuse victims, I think this is a big problem, is that when people live in a home, maybe where they're actually abused by a family member, and they grow up with that fear of somebody that they should trust, we see that their stress response is heavily manipulated as to where maybe they don't develop correctly. So they have a very difficult time as they grow older, obviously dealing with stressful environments where they feel that they're unsafe because they don't trust people, which I think is different when you grow up in a harsh environment where you're having to kind of protect yourself from the elements, not the elephants, but some people live in places where they have to protect themselves from elephants. And that may be, like I said, they're building a stress response that makes them stronger. But especially in abuse, in young children, and as well as chemical abuse situations, exposures, we see that these stress responses can be definitely affected.
So the term sympathetic, why that term?
Yeah.
What's that
I don't really know. What's interesting? Sympathetic, you think of I'm so sympathetic towards you. And sympathetic, actually, that part of the nervous system is not sympathetic to anybody around you. It is get your butt up and run and don't save anybody around you. Save yourself. That's right. That's what that part of that system comes in. So when it's really stimulated.
That sympathetic is the part of your nervous system that's fight or flight. It's time to act. So parasympathetic would be the opposite of that. So the relaxed.
Parasympathetic is called rest and digest.
Okay.
So
I think explain to people, because I think there are folks that are listening that think stress is bad, but it's not bad. Like you were saying earlier, what makes it good? Why? How is it a good thing?
Obviously, you need it in order to, like I said, even get out of bed in the morning. If your sympathetic nervous system does not kick in, you got problems. Some of the actions that happen during sympathetic stimulation of the nervous system are necessary for life. So you need to have that sympathetic reaction. And there's times when it needs to work. It's like exercising stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. And then after exercise stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's like you almost can't have one without the other. And if we're talking about like grown-up things here, I'm getting ready to launch a program on testosterone for all these guys out here who that's like, all you care about your testosterone. I've been doing a lot of research and reading, and the stress response, as far as sympathetic and parasympathetic, is essential for something like an orgasm. If you don't have a sympathetic response, nothing going to happen. And if you can't get into parasympathetic, where you can relax and enjoy it, nothing's going to happen. And so what we're seeing now is like, when guys want to talk about their testosterone, maybe one of their side effects is like, I'm doing this with my girlfriend. She's a hormonal doc, a fertility specialist, and we're doing this program together. And she's like, so what do we actually call? Should we call it an erection, or what do we call it? I don't want to be, and I'm like, I don't know. But we were laughing because you need all these very sympathetic and parasympathetic things to work together for this thing to happen. And what we're seeing in men nowadays is they're stressed out, way too sympathetic, where they can't. So they come to us like, I don't have enough testosterone. So they think immediately it's their testosterone, because society has kind of trained men to think that way, that testosterone is everything. Right. And really, testosterone is just a hormone that's synergistically like in this orchestra with insulin, adrenaline, cortisol, all these stress hormones, growth hormone, all these things. And it's not just testosterone. So if you're really stressed out, which is the typical male today, with a lot of non-normal stress, which is what we deal with today. So today we are not running from the lion and the tiger, at least in North America, in this community, we're not. But the stress is so different than it used to be. And people are sitting there again, ruminating, right? They're thinking, they can't shut their brain off. Well, if you go to bed at night and you can't shut your brain off and you're stressed out about all the things that you have in your life, the last thing your body wants to do is have sex. It's just not going to happen, because your parasympathetic and your sympathetic are not matching up. And so what I hear a lot of guys saying is, well, I need more testosterone. And what I say is, I would bet that your testosterone might be low, but what is your stress in your life? What are we talking about? What are you dealing with? And what I hear is, mixed families, ex-wives, multiple businesses, children in college, like all these things. And there's a lot of responsibility that is wearing down. And then you're not going to be able to have sex. And so,
which is a major problem, Hillary.
Right. So, for men and women.
We sort of pay attention to that. It's sort of the oh crap, something's broken and I need to fix it now. It's like the wake up call. And I think the worst part about stress today that we deal with is there's really not an easy fix. And I think that the reason a guy will say, like, I want testosterone, just give me testosterone, just give me the shot or whatever it is. Yeah, like that'll maybe help you feel better for a little bit, but that's an easier solution, and that's what people want. But the truth is that the real reason, if we just want to cover up a symptom, that's one thing. But the real reason may be that you're not addressing the stress that's going on in your life, really at a deep level. And it doesn't matter how much hormone you take or this or that. It's not really addressing the issue. And I would say that is probably one of the bigger
problems with hormonal dysfunction, dissatisfaction in life, poor relationships, and bad health. Period.
The way that I was listening to the Journal of Mountain Hunting, the Beyond the Kill podcast the other day, and they had Brian Mackenzie on there.
I love Brian. I've listened to Brian for years because he's really into breath work, and a lot of the work that I do with my patients is around breathing. And I heard him on there, and I was like, "What? Brian Mackenzie's a hunter?" So I was really impressed. Yeah, just a little shout out.
And so I really enjoyed the podcast. I did the Wim Hof thing for a while, so I was pretty interested in the breathing already. I've never been a particularly efficient breather, I think, and I don't think my cardio is at a level it could be if I was better at breathing. It's just something I just have always ignored and never really focused on before. And so listening to that's another discussion, but he was describing the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and how they operate. And I've heard this before. I think we've talked about this before. You look at the lion, and he described the lion and let's say the wildebeest, right? Or let's say the cheetah and the gazelle. And the cheetah, when he sprints after the gazelle, both the gazelle and the cheetah are experiencing the exact same sympathetic nervous system response. So the fight or flight, he's experiencing probably the fight, the cheetah, right? And the gazelle is experiencing the flight. But both of them have the same chemical reactions occurring in their body, like the same response, this sympathetic nervous system response, this I have to get away, I have to escape, or I have to kill this thing, I've got to catch it. And he said, it's just things are amped and through the roof. Adrenaline, everything's pumping, all systems are go. And then the cheetah, the gazelle gets away, right? Bounces away, escapes the cheetah. The cheetah gets away. The cheetah's, oh, dang it. I didn't get dinner, right? But what's the first thing the first thing that they do really is they immediately forget the stress. It's like, okay, danger's gone. It's over. Completely put it out of their mind. It's like, that was then, this is now. And the gazelle lays down, the cheetah lays down, and they both go into a parasympathetic nervous system response where they completely downregulate, as he described it, where you just completely go into this rest and digest phase where you're relaxing and you're coming down from this intense, stressful experience, right? Now you're coming down from that into this hyper relaxation mode. He's like, when I go run with my dog, he's like, my dog can run forever. It's like, my dog's built to run, and the dog will go hard, fast for 3-4 hours, 5 hours, just solid running. And what's the first thing the dog does when they walk in the house? It goes from, I'm so excited, to just boom, out for 4 or 5 hours. But he's like, what do humans do? We humans, we're stupid. We feel that way, and we should lay down and we should turn on that parasympathetic system. But we're like, okay, now I got to do this, and now I got to do this, and I got to get this done. And so we don't go through the down regulation process after something like that. And we stay in that parasympathetic place. Yeah. And he's like, that's where things get really messed up day in and day out. And I see that in other people's lives, all the time, because they'll get up super early. They'll go lift their weights. They'll go to the gym. They'll run. They'll do their thing. Then they'll get to work. They'll almost skip breakfast. They'll go on. They'll survive on coffee or some stimulants. They'll get a bunch of work done. And then when they get home, they hit something else that they got to go do. And you just go. And then at night, they're actually not able to sleep, even though they know they're tired.
Yeah, so sleep is interesting because sleep has so many kind of hormonal things that have to happen, serotonin, melatonin, decrease of cortisol, that whole parasympathetic response has to start turning on. Obviously, we are exposed to all these lights and we're all staring at our phones till midnight, so our circadian rhythms just get wacky. And I think what you're saying, that scenario that you just gave me about the average dude who's his day is that this is a type of life that I think I've always lived this life. So I don't know. I didn't live maybe I lived thousands of years ago, but I don't remember it, is that we think that this is how we're supposed to function. And we're kind of taught that we are supposed to go until we die. So you've heard this whole thing about you can sleep when you're dead, and you can, especially in the entrepreneur world, there's this whole concept of like, you don't need to stop. It's like Gary Vee, I love Gary Vee. I love his message, but it's just this like, don't bitch, just keep going. You don't need to sleep. Like, just get it done. And then you'll be successful. And then when you're successful, I think Gary Vee's thing is like, and when you're successful, still don't sleep and still keep going, but I think people still keep having this idea that someday I'll get to a place where I'll be able to just chill out. And I think retirement is like that word that we all hear of. And what happens to people usually when they retire? They just fall over dead, or they get some disease, or they get Alzheimer's, or like whatever, because we've lived an entire lifetime of just pushing our our sympathetic nervous system. And even like, with poor diet, and not just pushing the nervous system, but not really feeding emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. We haven't really maybe fed ourselves this heavy dose of like, stress relief.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter to me if I'm really successful in a business or, the other areas of my life if I'm not able to have sex. Like they sort of like really cancel each other out. I'll just be honest. Like it's to me, that's almost one of those canary in the coal mine things. Like, hey, something isn't right. I shouldn't be crushing at work and conquering in business, but then when I come home, have no sex drive. At some point, to me, that's like, well, there's some special things in life, and to not feel good to be successful in one area. Like, I think cognitively, mentally, you can be very happy, but physically, you could feel like crap. And I think it's a bad idea to divorce how you feel physically from how you feel, let's say, emotionally. I think of life kind of, and I would say that, like I've said earlier about kind of my personality, is I'm a go-getter. I'm a go until you drop dead. I can't get out of bed. That's how I function. And Ryan's always like, you just need to chill out. And I'm kind of I've always been like that. My mom said I was like that as a kid, and in my 40s now, I'm trying to teach myself that that's not serving me very well, that maybe worked for earlier in my life, but now I feel like it is catching up to me. And I think that we definitely need to accept the different stages in our lives as our brain changes, as our body changes, and that I think that there is that, saying of like, well, you can't take money with you when you're dead, and nobody writes on their epitaph, I wish I'd worked more, all these things. But it's hard to understand that when you're living it, right? Like, you want to be successful, you want to get these things accomplished in your life, you have a family, you want things for your children, you want to have a good marriage. Like, there's so many aspects of your life that you have to work on to be a well-rounded person. And truthfully, it's pretty stressful for a lot of people. And I think that's because of the expectations that we've put within ourselves and we've put within our society. I look back on like my grandmother, who she just died about 4 years ago. She was 80, mid 80s. She didn't really have a job, she lived during the Depression. Her mom was a single mom, which back then was like really stressful. Like, that wasn't acceptable. She married my grandpa at 19. She had 3 children. She didn't work, and then later on in life, she like taught blind people piano, and her whole life revolved around the church. She was a matriarch in her church, and she was in the same Bible study class for like 60 years or something ridiculous. And when she died of Parkinson's disease, she had really, I just don't feel like my grandma like
felt like she had missed things in her life. I feel like she had a really, she had knowledge about something different that maybe I don't even have. And I think that's because she grew up in a time that was different and she didn't have quite as many expectations. And maybe it's because she grew up in a time where women didn't have as many options. So they learned to live with it, like it was a housewife, a secretary, a banker, a teacher.
Right.
My grandma was like, those are your choices. That's what you did. And nowadays, I think as we become more progressive and we start including everybody into everything, which is great, like religious freedom, sexual freedom, women can do anything they want. Men even, there's so much pressure now put on us to be everything. And the truth is you start to realize you can't be everything. Like you said in the very beginning, you know everything. You can't know everything. And I think that as we evolve as a species where we are becoming smarter, more plugged in, more tuned in a lot of ways, we start removing ourselves from the truth of our physiology and we start making ourselves sicker by this idea that we have to know and do everything.
Yeah. If you kind of rewind the last 100 years even, or 200-300 years, when it got dark and people went to bed. And when the sun came up, they got up because, it's dark. So there's not a lot to do. And I think we, life was slower and you got, where your food comes from, you didn't have a lot of chemicals and all these other things that add stress to your life because of all the things you're ingesting that are artificial and unhealthy and, all the stimulants you take today that maybe you didn't have then. And there's a whole thing that the modern world, like you said, I really agree with you that it's really divorced us from our physiology. The way we have evolved to the point we are today, we're living in a modern world that does not actually feed our physiology the way it should. And so, in fact, it kind of wrecks it.
We are good at adapting, though, and I think that's one positive for humans and for our brains is that we can easily, or with training, adapt to situations, and we can either perceive them as stressful or not. Think about the first time you drove a car. Holy cow, totally stressful. So many things coming at you, and you got to push on the brake. Well, I learned to drive with a clutch, so you had to push the gas and the clutch and shift at the same time. It's like, patting your head and rubbing your stomach, chewing gum, whatever that thing was.
Absolutely true.
And remember when it was so scary. You're sweating. You are in sympathetic mode the first couple times you're driving. Yeah. You go to take your driving test and they make you parallel park and you think you're just going to die from sympathetic, and then you pass and you're like, and then you start driving more on this drive. And now you drive while you're talking on your headset, putting your mascara on, eating your breakfast, and you're flying down the freeway at 70. Okay. Yeah. So you have now adapted. Your stress system is now adapted where it's taking note of all these other cars, what other people are doing, and you're doing all these other things. And you're surviving. You don't get home at your end of your day like, I just drove home on the freeway and it was horrible. I almost died. Maybe if you had an experience where you almost died, that's where, again, your nervous system reminds you, listen, this is actually a very stressful thing you're doing. Yeah. Driving a deadly weapon down a freeway with thousands of other people going 80 miles per hour. Pay attention. Right? Yeah. But we don't do that until we have an accident and we realize how we just live on the we live on a hair of from one moment you can be alive, next moment you can be dead or disabled. And I think this is where we learn to adapt. And so there's so many of these things in our lives we do daily that we've just gotten used to. But remember the very first time you ever did it, how crazy scary it was.
For sure.
And I'm not a hunter. I have never killed an animal with my bow, at 20 yards with target panic. But I can imagine the very first time that you do that you have that experience, but then as you start to do it more, it becomes second nature, and you learn, you train yourself. What was it that worked or didn't work from that experience? And so it's all about, it is about training. And so I think the key is, how do you train people to utilize their strengths and how they perceive stress and utilize their strengths, and not turn people into just these like fight or flight creatures that are sitting at a desk doing nothing, like freaking out. I think that's the hardest thing.
I think that a lot of what is modern day stress, to be honest, Hillary, I think that it's, first of all, it's self-induced, and it's mental. It's mental. And so we have some stress, like you said, for example, a bear is coming at you, like Ryan charging.
Yeah,
him,
like
right?
me, a bear running at me. Oh, you wouldn't have wanted to see that. Ryan's like, oh, bear spray.
Yeah. So you're getting charged by a bear, and there's this fight or flight moment, right? Adrenaline's at the top, and then the encounter's over. And there's this type of stress where you experience it, and then it's gone. But then there's the stress, like, I need to make that phone call. I was supposed to call that guy 3 days ago. Haven't done it. And I need to send that email. I haven't done that. I need to, schedule the oil change. My daughter has a basketball game. I don't know. I need to get a babysitter for the other two kids so I can hit the game. And there's all these things, right? That we experience in a different way. It's not a stress like in the natural world where it comes and then it goes. Yeah. In the modern world, do you call it like an acute stress? Like it never leaves? It just,
actually, there's a great book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's by,
called what?
A scientist, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Mm-hmm. And it's by Robert Sapolsky. It's an old book. He's a researcher, and he mainly worked with animals in Africa, like in the Serengeti baboons. He studied their stress behaviors and how they live together and developed in their stress patterns. So his big research is stress. And he talks about, it used to be physical stress related to survival, and now it's called psychological and social stress. So we are in this constant fight or flight because we aren't running from the lion, but because we have this constant kind of psychological wheel going all the time, and the social stress of living in today's environment, which is in a way much more detrimental to the body.
But I think that is extremely self-induced, again, because if I go out in the wilderness for 2 weeks and I'm hunting elk, I'm dealing with, let's say it's late season, it's negative or it's 25 degrees outside. I'm cold, Hillary. My hands are cold. My feet are cold. My nose is cold. Like, I'm cold. And physically, I have to hike up to the top of this mountain, and I'm tired. And I get up there, and but then I see the elk, and I just like, the adrenaline comes, and I'm like, and I'm not tired anymore. In fact, I don't notice anything. I'm like in the zone, and I'm going after this animal, and there's something just thrilling about it and rewarding. And I hunt it, I stalk it, I get this shot, I kill the elk, and I pack it out, and it's this highly stressful experience. But then, I'm dealing with the cold, I'm making fires, I'm trying to deal with physical, like you said, very physical stressors. It's all like basic things, like I have to eat, I have to stay warm, I have to get some sleep, I have to climb the mountain, right? But then I come back, and at camp, I settle down, now I'm eating what I killed, I'm relaxing, I'm restoring my energy and so forth. And I'm out there for 2 weeks in the mountains, and there's these high intensity moments of physical challenge and moments of sleep, but also mental, because hunting is mentally challenging as well. Yeah. But it's like, it's just more primitive, all of that stuff. Then I come back to,
and we don't live like that anymore.
Then I come back to this modern world, and it's like, all those things I talked about a minute ago, these emails and these phone calls and these posts I got to get done and this video I need to edit. And it's like a completely 180-degree switch to some other life that's so opposite. And right. I feel fortunate because I do hunt and I do experience these periods of unplugging and doing these very primitive activities. And then I come back to this modern world and I'm like, what happens to those people who don't experience both? Because I'm much more able to handle the modern world, I feel, because of the primitive world I participate in on a fairly frequent basis, every few months or every other month, where I go out and I experience the primitive world. And it sort of keeps me grounded in the modern world where I'm like, who cares if I get that email sent in? Like, I got charged by a bear last week. Like, there's no one's going to die if I don't send the email. No, nothing's going to.
Perspective is everything. And when you haven't had those experiences that you've had, which the majority of the population in this culture hasn't, is that your perspective becomes very narrow, right? Mm-hmm. And, I think the things that people ruminate about and stress about, if they were to just have even 1 to 2 to 3 days in the wilderness just to survive, they would realize, one, they may be more grateful for what they actually do have and the fact that water comes out of your tap and, right. You can walk down to Whole Foods and buy like food right off the counter. Like, I mean, maybe that it brings in, and maybe that's what it is about it, is that when you come back to this world, you become more grateful. Your gratitude is bigger. And I think that would be the good thing that came out of it. But there's also this piece that's missing where people are not suffering in a way that pushes them to experience the rush of survival. And I think in the past that was just how you lived. You didn't think like, oh, I'm having an experience where I'm surviving and I'm like getting this benefit. You were just like, I got to get up. I got to get water. I got to do this. I got to chop wood. I got to, I think all the time about, because I grew up, like my stepdad is Native American and I've been to, the reservation and I've seen that way of life. And I've lived with Ryan and he's kind of like a modern day mountain man. If he had his choice, like my stepdad, if he had the choice to go back to those days, he would have in a second because it was within him. You could see it. This type of life was very difficult for him, even though he never lived during those times. It was like genetically in him. Yeah. I see that in Ryan, he has this, he always says like, isn't this so cool that maybe I stepped someplace that nobody's ever stepped before? Right. And I think to myself, sure. But I've always like been so intrigued by the thought of like, imagine the people, these Native Americans, and that's why I love to read about them and how they lived, because they lived in this, what we would call today, stressful, survivalistic way where you can't even imagine living like that. And it was how they lived. They thrived in that. And when we took that away from them, they dwindled. Like their genetics dwindled. Yeah, and the same thing with like guys like maybe Daniel Boone and these pioneers, because to leave England and get on a boat and like, I'm going to get on a boat and I'm going to go to some land I don't even know about. Right. All right. And not only that, now, I got here. Hey, honey, why don't we just get in some covered wagon and just head on over to Alaska? Like, there were no bridges over the Mississippi.
And let's get hunted by native people.
Yeah, and there's maybe wild people. Not only wild people, wild animals probably would kill you before a wild person would kill you, And I think that mentality, there's just certain people that have always had that within them to explore and to find that. And they just don't feel well if they don't have that stress put on them, because it's the stress of survival. It's the stress of like discovering how much you have within you to just be a person on the planet. And nowadays we just don't have that. And I think it's created a longing within people that actually stresses them out.
One of the things,
and they don't even know what it is, right? Like they don't know what it is. They're just like
for sure, like
animals in a cage.
One of the things that I think is the most awful things that you can do is the Wim Hof cold shower, cold bath, cold water thing. Dude, like there's nothing that sucks more than forcibly subjecting yourself to an ice bath. Like it sucks on so many levels, and the body's like, get me out. And you contrast that with like just a hot shower where you're just like, oh yeah, this feels so good. And as they're studying this and they're trying to figure out, why do people respond so well that subject themselves to this level of stress? Why is it that someone who goes out every day and takes a cold bath, or an ice bath, why is their immune system so robust, and why are they handling stress so much better than the other person? And one of the things that's come out of a lot of these discussions and sort of, I think, experimentation with this stuff is that the human body is built to be stressed all the time in a way where physically we're uncomfortable. But we live in a world where the thermostat is a perfect 70 degrees all day long. If it's too hot, you just turn on the AC. I think that there's there's all that stress that is all the physical discomforts that your body goes through that you actually need, but you don't get today because physically we pretty much live a very, very cushy, at least in, America today and in wealthier countries. We live in a world where you may never get cold, and your idea of cold is like so pathetic that it doesn't even come close to like a week in Alaska trying to kill a moose, right? There's a certain amount of misery that comes with it. And truthfully, most of the population of the world lives on less than $1 a day. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And so what that means is that a lot of people, a majority of the population on the planet, we're not just talking North America, on the planet live in very stressful conditions.
Right. We're wealthy.
But the research shows that these people tend to be happier. Okay. And so we know that the stress in our lives, like you said, is very self-inflicted, even when we have everything. We have all this success. We have all this money. Even if you make $32,000 a year in America, you're considered rich by world standards.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I think that, again, going back to the perspective, and remember, 100 years ago, you weren't stressed about, your stress was different. You were worried about getting smallpox or the flu. You were worried about dying of having your water dirty, getting cholera. If I think about being a pioneer, dude, cholera killed more people than anything, right? Like disease was the main contributor to deaths. And so stress was a very different, you were stressed in your environment of what was going to kill you in your environment on a daily basis. So it was usually infection, illness, or the elements. That's what was going to kill you. Yep. We don't think about that anymore. We have clean water, clean food. Usually we have the USDA and the FDA regulations, EPA to control all our stuff, the CDC, the NIH, like all these things were set up because back then they didn't have that and people were dying from things that really were hygiene related and could be prevented. But still, a lot of the world lives like that. They live worried about these diseases, worried about hygiene, worried about money. And again, they may be happier than the average millionaire who's living here in, Seattle with everything you could ever want. And so, like I said, there is something within our brains and within our nervous systems that actually needs that physical environmental stress to make us stronger. And that's why I say, if you grew up in like a bad neighborhood, like in Compton, and you had to learn your way around, you had to navigate, this is Compton, okay? This ain't like the BC Elkwoods. This is like, you got to worry about, if people are going to kill you or beat you up or take stuff from you. But those people a lot of those guys tend to learn, if they don't get into violence and whatever, they can learn to be very resilient people because their environment is kind of this dangerous environment that they have to navigate, right?
Right.
And we know that the unhappiest people and the most stressed out people are the richest, wealthiest people out there. They have huge homes with gated communities, no community. They don't have friends. They isolate themselves.
So let's talk about choices, because and changing stress and changing your life.
Yeah.
Because when I was so Suzanne and I, out of college, we built a tree house, and we lived in that tree house for like 8 or 9 years.
That is so cool.
And, we have some photos of it on Instagram and stuff. And
was it like a little tree house? Did you have like a porta potty in there and stuff?
So I went, when I was 19, I went on a mission to Japan for my church. Right. Oh. And so I was there for 2 years, and I lived in tiny apartments, 10 by 10 spaces. And you have your futon and cabinet. You roll it out on the floor at night. You roll it back up. You eat. You have a tiny refrigerator. You have a tiny little washing machine, if you had one. You have a tiny little bathroom. It's really just a hole in the floor. You just have like this tiny space. And so I learned to live in a very small space. And I also learned that you can't own a whole bunch of stuff in a small space like that. You just can't. Yeah. There's no room to put it all. You don't have a garage. And so you start to live a very minimalist lifestyle, and you start to do things with your time and money, and rather than collecting material things, you kind of spend it experiencing things instead. And I think, Japanese, you'll see them traveling all over the world. Well, they have money, but they don't have the money or the space to acquire possessions like Americans do. And so they tend to divert their funds from material wealth and building, a certain type of, I guess, lifestyle. And instead standard of living. Instead, they meet their needs physically with pretty simple minimalist stuff. And then they take that money and they go do things, and they go to other parts of the world, and they travel and they experience stuff. So after having seen that and having seen the difference between that culture and my own, and not that there aren't people in Japan that are very, that accumulate wealth and so on. It's just that the average person is kind of like, doesn't have that kind of money to be able to build wealth in that country, because it's so expensive to own a home. Millions, right? Yeah. So there's this big dichotomy there. And so the average like middle class person just has a little 10 by 10 place, and they go places. And so I came home, and I guess I just felt like I didn't want to own a whole bunch of stuff. And a good friend of mine who was a mentor throughout my life told me one day, everything you own owns a little bit of you. And that really clicked. I started to realize that everything that I had to take care of, manage, keep track of. And I read a couple of books like, does this stuff make my butt look fat? Or I can't remember, like a few books on like just like hoarding and collecting things and having too many possessions. And we live in a society where that's easy to do. And so I decided, you know what, I don't want that. I'm going to subject myself to a small place and really try to live a more minimalist lifestyle. And we built the treehouse, and it was fun. My wife has a degree in interior design, and she drafted it all up, and I had a construction company. And so I built the house, and it was really cool. And we lived there a long time. And again, you didn't have a couch because there was no room for a couch. You didn't have like all these things. And we spent a lot of time being outside and doing things, other things with our money and our time. And that's carried with me, I think, my whole life. And I tell myself this often, and that is this, that money does not, if I'm not happy because we're rich in America, like you said, to the global standards, I think 90-something% of Americans are richer than anybody else, than the rest of the world population. We're rich. So even the poorest among us are rich. Like, we're not in danger of starving to death. Even the poorest among us in general. I mean, there are some that are really, but mostly when we drive a crappy car and live in a crappy hovel of an apartment or something, we have jobs still. We can feed ourselves if we're rich in global terms.
I think one thing about it though that maybe is causing a lot of stress in people's lives, even though we do have money, quote unquote, is I think the statistic is that the average American is 2 paychecks away from bankruptcy.
Right.
And this is because the way that we have been basically taught in the last probably 3 to 4 generations, or maybe 3 generations, is that is not to save well. And so many Americans are in large amounts of debt. And even like, okay, I'm like a highly educated person. I have a very expensive education. I have a large debt load from deciding that I wanted to be a physician. And that can wear on you. And so you figure a large percent of the population is trying to live the life and have the things and drive the car and have the job and the career. And at the same time, they have had to spend large amounts of money to actually get those things, but they don't truly own them. And I think that this is where a large part of stress comes in, is that most people are indebted. And my grandparents didn't even know what a credit card was.
Right.
You know, they were like, what?
Part
so
of this
the system has changed.
Part of this journey I went on, I read the Total Money Makeover and the Millionaire Next Door and the Millionaire Mind and then Tim Ferriss, the 4-Hour Work Week, and other things where I'm like, okay, well, what do I really think of money and its value? And one of the things that I decided at some point was, I'm not going to owe people money. I'm done. I'm not going to have debt. No debt. And I'm going to have money set aside. So I have flexibility. So in the case of an emergency or in the case of not having work or something, that I have money there. That meant I couldn't own things like the giant house, the all-terrain vehicles, all the things that we tend to stack up. And I decided not to have those things and to get out of debt. And I think that, and what I've learned and what I've told myself after especially witnessing some of the poorest people I know being some of the happiest people I know. And now I tell this to a lot of friends all the time and to myself all the time. If I'm not happy with, being poor, a whole bunch of money is not going to fix it. Like money isn't going to change my happiness. Studies have shown like wealth does not make you happier. It just sort of, if you can't be happy with no money, money's not going to change it. And
well, that's the statistic I talked about earlier, is that the unhappiest people are usually the wealthiest people. And that's because the wealthier you become, sometimes the more stuff you have and the more you go into that animalistic thing of I've got to protect my stuff from people who may take it from me. And that creates a bit of, you wall yourself off from the rest of the world and you become lonely. So it's definitely true that millionaires, billionaires, people that have these gated communities and homes and things that most of us strive for, we'd be like, whoa, I'd love that. They are actually have higher suicide rates. They have higher alcohol and drug addiction rates. And a lot of it comes down to as you isolate yourself because now you've attained what you thought was important, you actually become lonely. And in a way that's mentally stresses you out, because having community is actually one of the best ways in which to relieve your social stress. And just like I said with my grandmother, she didn't have an exuberant life. They lived in the same house for 50 years, but she had her community. And that was when she died and I went to her funeral and I sat in that church that she helped to build with hundreds of people in there, all who, and many hundreds others who had already passed on because she was older, like I see that is what sustained her and gave her purpose in her life. And that's something I'd want to take myself and look at and be like, I attained to be successful. I obtained to have things in my life because that seems like the way to go. But in the very end, like, what do you want? You want to be by yourself?
Yeah.
Or do you want to be laying there in your casket with hundreds of people who are looking at you going, you changed my life. You were there for me. You created this place that I could come and be part of community. And I think that's very difficult for most people nowadays. That is the American way, is to be independent, to be resourceful. But I think in a lot of ways we've lost that community. And that's a huge piece of reducing stress.
Yeah, the book Walden, Life in the Woods by Henry David Thoreau.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating book to me. And I've read it a couple of times now, and he just goes out in the wilderness, and with hardly any money at all, he tries to build a house by Walden Pond, and he builds this house and he lives in it, and he just lives a very minimalist lifestyle. Again, back to this minimalist approach to life, and the happiness that he experienced in that lifestyle was powerful and life-changing for him. So I keep going back to that in my own life. Am I seeking money, or am I seeking a life? Am I seeking wealth and toys and material things, or am I seeking to have a life? And Aaron Snyder and I are both like, in that one regard, we're very similar. Aaron's lived in a condo forever. He's driven a modest car forever. I've done similar things where we didn't spend our money accumulating wealth, but rather strategically building the life we want to have. And I think when I heard my wife talking about this friend of hers and others, I'm like, these people are in this hamster wheel, just going and going and going in this rat race that they're engaged in. And they're so busy, getting the new car and buying the new house, the bigger house now up on the hill over here, and being completely maxed out, financially to this extreme level, to the 10th degree. And they work all day, multiple jobs. They get home at night. They don't talk, the husband and wife, and they go to bed, and they just keep repeating this over and over again. And you go out and you get a new car, because that's going to fix things, but it doesn't actually fix anything. So I think, a lot of stress is, we're talking about, choices are power, the choices you make about deciding. I just think people should strategically work toward the life they want to have. And if you think it's just going to happen, it won't. And it's too easy to get distracted with all the things in the world today, and then all of a sudden wake up and go, it's 20 years and I'm not living a life I want. This is just the trap, the human race trap I'm in.
Yeah, like I said, I think so much of it has to do with, our evolution as humans. And, 100 years ago, boy, people would probably have, if you could have told them, well, you can do this and this and this, and then you'll have this and this and this. And they'd be like, really? Holy cow. Okay, I'll do it. But they may not have actually understood the concept of it. Whereas now I think that we have I think just the way the society we live in now is that I think you can grasp the concept of being wealthy and having a lot of stuff. But do we really understand what that's doing psychologically to us? And are we going to be able to have the long-term health from it? Because some people can. I mean, I think that there's lots of wealthy people out there that are changing the world. They're giving back. And that's what I would like to see, is that all of us who do have money and that have wealth, quote unquote, whatever it is that, your long-term goal is that you're giving back in a way that's benefiting like I said, the other 99% of the population who doesn't have the benefit of having where we are. I always think to myself, I'm so fortunate of where I was born and the time I was born, and as a woman, to be born when I was, and to be able to have the things that I have in this country. And I feel very fortunate for that. A lot of people may say that I shouldn't because we don't have that, but I've never experienced that in my life, and maybe, I don't know, there's lots of different theories on that. Maybe it's because I'm white, or maybe it's because I live in Washington. Yeah. I don't know. I think it has to do with it. I was born in this time, and I used I was able to use everything that I had at my fingertips to, I had that potential. I was able to use my potential that I was for. Maybe my grandma, she lived in a time when she maybe had the dreams I had, and she couldn't do it. And so her dreams were different, you know?
Right.
And so I feel like I always feel so happy because I've been to places in the world. I've experienced places where women don't have the same rights. I could never be doing what I'm doing in other places. And that's right now in 2018.
Well,
like so I feel like my gratitude for where I am in my life is so good. And I have 2 daughters, you know, I know you have 3 daughters. Again, you know, I feel hopeful for their future and that they're going to be able to achieve great things. But what I want to do is, honestly, I want to pass on to them that what's most important is not how educated you are. What's most important is not all the things that you have. And it's hard, right? Christmas just happened. And it's like my daughter, they get to this age where they're like, what's the next present? What's the next present? What's the next present? And you're
right.
like, stop, you know? But you get it. You know, this is this kind of entitlement. There is a bit more entitlement nowadays where I think we hand our kids a lot more stuff than we used to.
Yeah.
So but what I would like to teach my children is, you know, your body, first of all, and your brain are the only things you really have. That's it.
Yeah.
Like if you have nothing else, that's all you have. And so if you don't care about that, if you don't understand it, if you don't love it, if you don't nurture it, and you don't care about that in other people in your life because that's all they have as well, and they're part of your life, then that's an issue for me. And I think being in medicine, this is where I get so kind of frustrated because, man, there's so many sick people. There's so many people zombie walking around feeling, like you said earlier, horrible and just thinking this is how life should be. I should be stressed out like this. I should feel stressed out. I should have, and we're just seeing it now, and it's going to bankrupt our culture. It is going to, I just recently listened to, Chris Kresser. I think he was on Rogan recently, and I've followed him for a long time, but doctors are talking about this now. The healthcare in this country will bankrupt us in 20 years because the rate at which we're going cannot be stopped. It is like a train that is recently here in Seattle, we just had a train wreck. They were supposed to go 30. They were going 80 around the corner. And what happened? A train flew off onto the freeway and killed people. That's what's happening. This country is headed for a derailment in the healthcare system. And I wholeheartedly agree. And this is all based on personal choice.
Yeah.
Everybody, you have a body. It's yours. You have a brain. It's yours. What are you doing with it? And I'm expecting...
you have a life that's yours. What are you doing with it?
You have a life that's yours. So what are you doing with it, and how are you treating it? And people care more about their cars, their houses, their shoes in their closet than they care about their bodies. And you wonder why we're all stressed out. And so it's that's, I think, the most frustrating and the most rewarding thing as a physician is you get to actually witness people make the changes. You're just a facilitator, Yeah. I don't do anything for people. I facilitate them.
Well, you touched on something that I think is really important. And I touched on it with the movie I did about Suzanne and her cancer, and gratitude, I think, is huge. And it also helps you combat ego and pride, which I think is a lot of what drives keeping up with the Joneses mentality and spending money you don't have and things like that. Or chasing a dream that you don't really want. Like Dave Ramsey says, don't spend your life, something to this effect. Like, don't spend your life, buying things you don't really want to impress people you don't really care about. And that's kind of what
that's what everybody's doing. Yeah. That is what people are doing. Just go on social media. And this is what we're going to be fighting in our children and in our grandchildren. And maybe it's not a fight. maybe we're just going to have to lay down and die and accept that this is the way the world is.
Well, I think that gratitude, I think that's big. I think having gratitude is big. Like you said, being thankful for, the right things and for having, and for what you have helps you really not feel like you have to fill this life up with, like I said, like things you don't want to impress people you don't care about. Like you're like, I'm so grateful for the car I have. I'm not sitting here wishing I had the other car. I'm so grateful for the house I'm in, instead of thinking I need a house twice as big. It's like that gratitude is a big deal. It's a foundation. And I think it helps you, instead of, going down this ego pride trip, like we talk about in Ego is the Enemy, you're over here instead feeling grateful for things and to other people. And you're realizing I'm here where I'm at because of a lot of fortunate things in my life, not because I'm Mr. Awesome, Yeah. So I think that's big.
I think too, I know that a lot of people live in very stressful situations, meaning they live in very unhappy relationships. And you and I sit here and talk about like, oh, just be grateful and like be happy and you have your family and you have these things. And honestly, like most people they're not even in a marriage that's happy. They don't even communicate. They have, like you said, Suzanne's friend, that there's very little communication, I think, going on these days compared to what there used to be, based on probably more like distractions, the phone and social media. So we're talking on this format that we are not really talking to people, but we're talking to them. And yet we have people all around us that are starving for attention and starving for that relationship. And women, especially, guys out there, I just want to remind you that, okay, Brian, I'll take you as an exception to the rule here, because I know you're more the chick in the relationship, but, women, like I think I said this in our last podcast together, is there's a certain amount of nurturing women need that's different than men. The stress response in women, it's interesting that some of the research done shows that why are all these things in the world mostly done by men? And when I say that, I say like mass murders, mass shootings, killings, war. You rarely ever hear of women doing any of these things. Serial killers, there's like maybe one or two women serial killers. But women are mainly perpetrators usually perpetrate on women because you could say the weaker sex and everything else. Mm-hmm. And over just probably the whole host of history, we've been most discriminated against. But I think that, it's the reason you don't see women doing this is because our stress response is more to reconcile and befriend people, because we work better in groups. And so it's even the school system, the public school system is set up really to train girls, to teach girls, because girls do much better working in groups, sitting down, having discussions, befriending each other, unless you're in like the high school mean girl situation. But, genetically, women, and even animals, if you look at families of animals, the women are the ones who usually take care of the children. They're the ones who befriend the other people, and they work together in community. And that we find that when women are doing those things, they have much better stress responses and they're healthier. Mm-hmm. Whereas men and male animals, they tend to be more isolationist, more independent, and their stress responses can be different. And they tend to be more protector as well as fighting and aggression. There's just, I think testosterone plays into part of that as well, right? Right. So we know this. So what I want to say to men out there is that if you're in a bad relationship with your wife or your whatever and it's stressing you out, why don't you just think more about how she's actually physiologically working and her stress response? So if you're ignoring her all the time, you're not paying attention to her, you're not responding to her emotional cues, you're not helping her with the children, you're not doing some of the things. You're not giving her time to be by herself and rejuvenate and be with her friends and get that community around her. You're just pissing her off. And she's just going to continually be stressed out because she's not getting that community and those arms around her that she needs. And so women in general need more of that, where men in a lot of cases need less of that. And they don't tend to be as stressed out if they don't get it. And so what I see a lot is I see obviously more women, because women spend most of the healthcare dollar. And usually when they come in with a stressor, it always boils down to they have a stressful relationship. It's usually their marriage or their significant other, and there's something going on. And I'm telling, some people live 20, 30, 40 years like this. And so I would just want to say that if you're going to address stress anywhere in your life, you should obviously address it with yourself, and you should address it with your spouse.
Well,
because that's like your main relationship in your life if you're an adult, unless you still live with your mom in her basement or something. I think that's an important relationship too. But
yeah,
I'm just saying that I think that that's a big initial stressor that you then take into your life. And the other thing, if you're treating other people in your life better than you're treating your spouse, you're just stressing your spouse out. And I think causing more problems.
I think part of this discussion, though, you have to talk about extreme ownership, because what you're saying here in this situation where like a husband and a wife are not getting along, and you're addressing the wife's needs and the husband, and you're like, as you explain this, the problem I see in a lot of relationships is the dude is sitting there going, my wife, it's all her fault. Like, we're not getting along, but it's her fault. Like, there's she's just this or she's just that, right? What you're saying is, this sort of extreme ownership point of view, where if your wife isn't doing well, you got to own that. Like, that's you. Yeah. You as the man in this relationship, you're responsible for that. Like, you can't, and until someone takes that extreme ownership point of view, I don't think they can ever fix anything. And that's not just in the relationships. That's like all of life. Like, you got to own as much as you can. And it sucks because, let's be honest. I mean, part of it is the spouse in this relationship that's not functioning. But if you both take that extreme ownership point of view, you fix things. But if you're always it's their fault.
Yeah.
I do everything right.
That's how people do, I think a lot of people check out in a way because they are stressed out, and their brains can only handle so much, So, some people, come on, you have kids, you have work, you have all these things you got to think about. It's stressful sometimes. You just want to check out. But I think sometimes, if we're talking about that parasympathetic response, we've been at work all day and we've been stressed out all day. And it's like you want to come home, right? I hear this from a lot of men. I just want to go home and relax. My wife doesn't understand what I've been through all day and what I've been dealing with all day. I just want to go home and relax. And then I get home and she wants me to take care of the kids. And it's like, well, she's been home all day with the kids, or she has a job too, and she has to come home now. Right. And, she wants to relax too. So who's more important in this relationship? And really the truth is it just comes down to communication. And if you want to have a long, healthy life, having a spouse that you can communicate with and you can get angry with and you can say you're sorry to, and you can accept fault, and you can just listen to, sometimes you don't even need to do anything. You will actually decrease your negative stress response. You will improve both of yours positive stress response, and it will make your children's lives better. You will teach them how to communicate. And I think that this is the main situation that we have going on in our life now, is that we're all in so many different directions. Our kids have activities. We have activities. Like you said, our whole day is full. We cram in every second. And where's the time where we just sit and we just be? And I think that's what it is about nature. Like you said, you go out, you're just in nature. You're just there. There's no schedule. You're just living. You're doing it. And this is what we're missing. So.
I struggle like Jordan Harbertson. He calls it FOMO, FOMO, fear of missing out. And
fear of missing out. That's what I have. I totally have it.
I have it bad. That's one of the things that I had to really come to grips with years ago. And that was, I can't do it all. It's physically impossible. I can't maintain every relationship that I've built over the years. There's too many people in my life to to like hit them all up and keep those relationships at a level where they were maybe 2 years ago, right? Like it's just not possible to be at every kid's game and to read them a book every night before they go to bed. And it's not possible to be superhuman, super husband. Like all the things that you have, these expectations you set for yourself on the things you want to accomplish in the world. And I have a whole list of things that I want to accomplish through Gritty Bowman. Things I want to produce and podcasts I want to do and people I want to meet. But Hillary, it's too easy and it's too common, I think, for people because of that fear of missing out, because of these expectations we set for ourselves to beat ourselves up because we can't do it. And one of the best things I ever did was just let myself go, like forgive myself, be like, yep, this relationship is going to disappear because I don't have the time to keep it at this state. And that's just something that I've realized that's just part of life. Life is just that way. You can't have it all. You have to let things go and be okay with it. And well,
let me just interject you here is that's true, but sometimes physiological, that's hard for people to turn off. And some of that is based on genetics. And we just interviewed a friend of mine, Dr. Ben Lynch, who is a big guy in genetics. And we're going to be airing that podcast, which is really good. And he talks about personality and genetics, which kind of feeds into this. Like I said, my personality is like yours. I have like a Santa list of like all these things I want to do before tomorrow.
Yeah.
And like we just wrote an ebook. I finished that ebook in September and Ryan was on an elk hunt. It was elk season. So he was like, see you later. And I finished that ebook and I just didn't sleep for like 2 weeks because I was so excited. I got it done. And then I just crashed. I got it done. I just crashed. And that's because I have a really hard time. Like at the end of my day, if something's not done, I can't relax. It's very difficult for me. I will stay up until it's done. And so I have a hard time going into the next day and not continually working on it. And that includes like, I will not exercise. Sometimes I won't eat. I will just get it done. And Dr. Lynch said to me, because we were talking about genetics and probably the difference in my COMT gene versus Ryan's COMT gene, which is called the worrier versus the warrior gene. And, he said, well, Hillary, I'm just like you. That's how I function. That's how I've gotten to where I am. He's got really an empire in medical genetics. And he said, what you have to start telling yourself is that there is always tomorrow. Usually, maybe you won't wake up tomorrow. That could happen.
Right.
But there is always tomorrow and that you have to stop, that you have to tell you literally have to tell yourself. Stop.
I used to be.
And some people can do it easily. Like Ryan, I said, he stops. He knows when to stop. He knows when to say no. He knows when to do that. But I have more of the worrier gene. And so my tendency is to go. I dream about it. I can't stop thinking about it until it's done.
I don't know if I have the worrier gene as much as I have the dreamer gene. And so I have a tendency to like dream about all these things I want to get done and then try to chase those things and do them. But I used to have the same issue where I couldn't go to sleep or I wouldn't quit or I just hyper focus on the one thing till I could get it done. And my life would fall apart. And I've spent a lot of time telling myself, and learning to shut that down and say, you know what? It's okay if I don't accomplish. So I have my list, right? And what I do on a regular basis, I try to prioritize on that list of things that I've made for myself. And the list is long and the list is meaningful from top to bottom for me. Mm-hmm. Then I go through and I look at the hours it's going to take to accomplish this long list of meaningful and important things to me. And I realize just from a logistical, like practical standpoint, it's not humanly possible. It's just not. It's not.
I mean,
it's not.
You only
and
have so much in there.
I look at that and I go, okay, well, if I want to have a good relationship with my wife and I want to have a good relationship with my kids and I want to have, a good relationship with these other people and I want to accomplish these things with Gritty Bowman and in the hunting community and in conservation and in my spiritual space, my physical conditioning, my physical space. If I want to accomplish all these things, it boils down to time is finite. It's not infinite. And I have to now actually prioritize which things are the most important to my life and that I really want to accomplish, and what things I can't, and actually look at it from a realistic point of view on the time I have and what can be done within that window of time. And it's sort of like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People in that sense, right? Like it's this thing where you're actually putting it down and you're actually prioritizing. Mm-hmm. And when I do that, that's a huge stress reducer for me, because then I realize I stop beating myself up over this thing I feel like I need to do, because now I'm like in the priority of things and in the time frame I have available. Mm-hmm. It fell out. Like you're below the line. Like Dave Ramsey has this thing when you're getting out of debt. He's like, here's all of my list of debts. Here's the total amount of money I have for this month. And the list of debts are prioritized 1 through 50, let's say. It's horrible to owe 50 people, different people money, but sometimes it happens, right? Yeah. And you have enough money to take care of the first 10. Anything else is below the line. Like there's no money. So there's no point in stressing over not paying them, because there's no money anyway. Like you can't do it. And so for me, that's like that priority list gets built, and then there's stuff that's below the line. And once it's that, there's no time to address those things. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the money or the time. They're below the line. They get cut from my life. Like I give myself permission to let those dreams go, to sacrifice those opportunities. And I focus on the ones that are achievable, that I prioritize as the most important within my time and money constraints. Mm-hmm. And it's a huge liberating feeling to be able to do that. And that's what I've practiced over the years. And it's like, okay, in all these different areas of my life, I have goals for certain things, and then I hit those things and they're prioritized, and the stuff that doesn't work, it's just gone. And being able to like give myself permission has been hugely liberating. And now I walk around going, yep, I'm just letting it go. And I'm much more adept at dropping things out of my life that are wonderful things that would add a lot of value to my life, but I just can't do it all.
I think, too, we want to remember that because we have that cerebral cortex, we have the ability to make choices that can train us to feel like that, to realize you've trained yourself to realize, okay, there's nothing I can do about that. Training yourself not to go, and then die. And that could be a really hard learning curve, but we have the ability to do that. And I think that where a lot of people get stuck is they don't really know where to start because they're just doing what they've always done.
Despite our ever-changing, ever-indignant world with its growing ignorance of and indifference to the ways of the wild, I remain a predator, pitying those who revel in artificiality and synthetic success while regarding me and my kind as relics of a time and place no longer valued or understood. I stalk a real world of dark wood and tall grass stirred by a restless wind blowing across sunlit water and beneath star-strewn sky. And on those occasions when I choose to kill, to claim some small part of nature's bounty for my own, I do so by choice, quickly, with the learned efficiency of a skilled hunter. Further, in my heart and mind, I know the truth and make no apologies for my actions or my place in time. Others around me may opt to eat only plants, nuts, and fruits. Still others may employ faceless strangers to procure their meats, their leather, their feathers, and all those niceties and necessities of life. Such is their right, of course, and I wish them well. All I ask in return is no one begrudge me, and all of us who may answer the primordial stirrings within our hunter souls, my right to do some of these things myself.
What you just heard is a quote from M.R. James. We truly live in a world that is largely ignorant and indifferent to the ways of the wild. And although some regard us as relics of a time and place no longer valued or understood, we have the opportunity to change the way these people view the hunter and the hunt. We can share our experiences and nature's bounty with those who employ these faceless strangers.
And by so doing, we make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for the wild animals in the wild places we care so deeply about. Never stop sharing your passion for hunting and the outdoors. Our wild animals and our wild places depend on it.
This is Ty Stubblefield, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowman.
Gritty Bowman.